what we call the new collar economy, it's a team sport. The only way you exist is if you're able to lead, but also know how to follow and give trust and get trust as well. And part of that, unless you have that foundation of trust, it's difficult to make mistakes.
Welcome to The Path to Wealth, the show about well-being, fulfillment, and financial freedom. And I'm your host, Hennche. Welcome back to The Path to Wealth. I'm your host, Hennche. Today we're thrilled to have Joe Brady. Joe is a renowned speaker, author, and seasoned commercial real estate strategist with over 30 years of experience helping major retailers and corporations adapt to the digital transformation of their brick-and-mortar footprints. Recently, he published his book, Workshop, the consumer-driven transformation of commercial real estate. And today we will discuss how technology, consumer behavior, and commercial real estate intersect. Thank you for joining us, Joe. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
And given that you have such a broad and interesting past, where would you say your favorite career journey stemmed from? Which experience, which period of your career?
I would say I've been really lucky to have had really interesting roles in and around commercial real estate. So very early in life, I worked for Burger King Corporation. I had a chance to become a franchisee and owned and ran 7 restaurants with a partner. What I realized then was I loved everything about the process of buying land, building the building, kitting it out, everything up until you turn the key and you welcome the public in. So I realized I was not an operator. I was a developer. And so I think for a lot of young people who tend to think in more reductive thoughts, it's just as important to learn what you don't want to do as what you do want to do. So as much as that was a challenging part of my life, I value it because I learned so much. And then I was part of a rollout of a number of very high volume retail concepts. One was Hollywood video, which interestingly enough is an industry that doesn't exist anymore, home video rental. But I was part of the team that came in. I joined that company at about 100 stores and left after we built 2,000 stores all over the country. So, that was ripping and roaring and fun and getting to go to places that most people have never heard of. I went to Minot, North Dakota in January. I don't advise that, by the way. But
I've been in Grand Forks, North Dakota in early February.
Yes, so you're a wise man. I was able to start a consulting firm called the Standard Group, which was an outsourced retail company. And we were the real estate department for hire for a number of different concepts. And our biggest client was T-Mobile. So we opened the first couple thousand T-Mobile corporate stores in the U.S., which allowed us to then sell our little business to JLL, Jones Lang LaSalle, JLL, second largest real estate company in the world. And we sold that we closed January 2nd, 2008. So I'll take lucky over smart. That was good timing. That led to me working there, leading the retail practice, and Walgreens was one of my clients. Ultimately, I joined Walgreens as the head of real estate. So I felt like that was a really big job. Everything about that experience had extra zeros. There were 9,000 stores. There was 150 million square feet. The annual operating budget was $4 billion. And so it was an exciting time to be at Walgreens. We were doing a lot of integration. We brought in 1,900 some stores from Rite Aid into the mix, merged them in. So I had these wonderful experiences along the way. But Hennes, to your question, I would say the collection of people that I've accumulated along the way has been really the most satisfying. I can reach back and call people today In fact, my current partner, Steve Cutter, with Lockhouse and LRG Investors, he and I met 25 years ago, working on deals, and he was based in the Bay Area in Northern California. And so, what I love about the commercial real estate industry is, as long as you're not a jerk, as long as you're fair to people, treat people fair. As I said, treat people fairly. You can accumulate and collect great people, great friendships, great connections that can help you in many aspects, personally and professionally. So that, to me, in commercial real estate is the best part.
And especially if you've known somebody for 25 years, you've seen them go through cycles, you've seen them go through challenges, so you actually know what you're getting into so much more, like having these long-term relationships. And Warren Buffett speaks about that a lot. You can operate at the speed of
Right.
trust.
Which is, I feel like our trust in institutions and government in lots of areas gets damaged or eroded. Maybe it's because we know too much. We're also operating at the speed of technology, and anything that happens, we know about it real time. So when you actually have bonds with individuals, so you've been through the trenches, you've worked with each other, you're okay to have a disagreement. You can have civil discourse, which is far from common today. You really value those personal and professional friendships, I think.
Yeah. Would you say that they are a pillar of a successful career, those relationships that you build over those decades?
I think it's the most important thing. You can have the best education, as many diplomas. You can have, you could have worked your way up the corporate ladder by stepping on people and crushing them. But karma exists. And so if you're interested in a long-term view, you have to have those relationships, right? If you want to go fast, run by yourself. If you want to run really, really far, run with people, run with your team, your tribe. And so I know I've heard that many, many times, and I believe it. There are some singular players in different industries that stand out. In commercial real estate, as in technology, as in a number of other areas, particularly in what we call the new collar economy, it's a team sport. And so, the only way you exist is if you're able to lead, but also know how to follow and give trust and get trust as well. And part of that, unless you have that foundation of trust, it's difficult to make mistakes. And failure has always gotten a bad rap. I remember several years ago, Harvard Business School, Harvard Business Review had a whole failure magazine, a whole edition on failure and failing up and so forth. You can't go into something and not succeed unless you have that strong foundation, and that strong foundation certainly is made of trust.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say over the years has crystallized as you as one of the biggest shifts in commercial real estate?
Well, it's the lack of shift in commercial real estate. It is the fact that commercial real estate is still measured in terms of 5 and 10-year increments compared to the world we live in now, which by any account is measured in terms of weeks or months. In short order, I think it was something like 4 months, NVIDIA went from a $2 trillion valued company to a $3 trillion valued company, right? So I wrote this book, workshop, just thinking about the fact that the rest of the world is operating at a different frequency than commercial real estate. And the retail sector felt the acceleration of technology first. In 1999, Jeff Bezos was on the cover of Time magazine as the first person of the year. And he obviously launched Amazon, which led to It led to this whole series of headlines suggesting that the brick and mortar stores would be dead. Death of the retail store. You saw that clickbait left, right, and center. What happened though is the consumers had a say, and they decided that they wanted both online and brick and mortar retail. And what we now know is omni-channel retail. And we hear so much about the last mile and deliveries. And what happened is technology accelerated to a point where consumer behavior was changed. And it took a while for the retail real estate world to catch up. And there were many retailers that were irrelevant and have gone away or have been reconstituted in different forms. There have been very many, a whole host of physical malls and retail spaces that have been either demolished or reconstituted as well. So as recently as 2019, I was working with a company called the Instant Group, based in London. I was the CEO of the Americas, and the company is essentially the Airbnb of flexible office space. So it has the platform on which the WeWorks, the IWGs, and a host of others operate, in addition to building out bespoke offices for Fortune 500 companies. So I was at the beginning of the pandemic in this flexible office industry. I joined December of 19, and it became very evident that we had a massive change that was happening, and it absolutely dawned on me that the office sector was having a retail moment. Everything that we heard during the pandemic, the office is dead, no one's ever going to go back to the office, was the same clickbait and sort of reductive and intellectually lazy thinking that happened during the whole retail period. Now, we know, I'm part of ICSC, which is the formerly the International Council of Shopping Centers. Now it's the trade group for everyone or anything having to do with retail real estate. And ICSC has done some terrific research that suggests that when a retailer opens a brick and mortar retail store, online sales in that trade area go up 6 to 7%. And what's even more interesting is when that a retailer closes a brick and mortar retail store in a trade area, the online sales go down between 12 and 13%. So we as consumers spending our money want agency, autonomy, and optionality. We want to be able to, I don't know how many boxes are sitting at my front door right now, but chances are many of them are being sent back. But some of them are being delivered back to a store. And so we know that consumers want to have that optionality of how and where they spend their money. And we've gotten used to that because we've been doing it for over a decade. With the pandemic and with the future of work, we're all the same people who are voting with our wallets and how we spend our money. We actually now have this ability to vote with our feet in how we make our money. And so that's why I wrote this book called Work Shop, because I observed that shop was previously a noun. It was a physical place you went. You went to the store in a shop, your community, and then it became a verb. It was a thing you did, irrespective of place. And I argue that work is going through that same metamorphosis. It was, where are you going, Hennche? I'm going to work, and that was either associated with a restaurant or it was associated with your office, but now office and work are decoupled, and work is something that we do irrespective of place. And again, I'll couch this by saying in what Ginny Rometty, the former CEO of IBM, coined the new collar economy. It's that keyboard economy where we're producing ideas and thoughts and work product that is not bound to a factory or a production line. right? And so in this modern economy, the world is being measured in terms of weeks and months. And yet, commercial real estate, office in particular, is still operating at a frequency of 5 or 10 years. So there's a reckoning that needs to happen, and it's a bit it's concerning for me because of the health of communities in which this commercial real estate exists. You mentioned you moved from New York City. The office, 75% of the office space in New York City was built before the IBM mainframe, 1964. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a staggering statistic. And so, how relevant are those buildings today? How easily could they be converted into something else? How efficient, energy efficient are they? What sort of indoor air quality? No one ever talked about indoor air quality before the pandemic. Now it's a must, right? It's essential. We need to have healthy buildings because if not, we're not going to have healthy employees. So yeah, that was a very very detailed long answer to your astute question. Yes, right. It is. If you think it's complicated today, wait a month or wait a year, right? The problem's acute and it's only going to get worse. And we often talk about the notion of agility, how to how to create more flexibility and optionality into your physical portfolio. And for many Fortune 500 companies, real estate can be upwards of 20, your occupancy can be upwards of 20 to 50% of your cost base. Um, more closer to 2025, but in some instances, if you have R&D, if you have a whole host of other areas, the cost of real estate can be quite expensive. But if you just think about the office component, we have to think differently, and corporations have to stop sort of pointing at each other and saying you're in charge. No, you're in charge. Is it HR's responsibility? Is it real estate's responsibility? The CFO, the CIO. There has to be this emergence, and we're seeing it from some leading companies of a chief workplace officer who is facile in HR matters and in real estate matters, in technology matters, and connect it with finance as well, such that there's a network of places where individuals can gather and meet and work. We have to get away from this industrial era construct of the main office hub. In the new collar economy, we don't have to go and work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. We do that because, well, that's how we started in the fields in the agrarian period, and then we moved into factory buildings, and that's the only reason we went there is because that's where the machines were. That inputs came in, we pulled a lever, and an output came out. But now we're in this keyboard economy, and the technology has allowed us to become untethered. We can work from anywhere. So what does that mean? And so it's vitally important to acknowledge that this notion of hybrid work does not mean everyone's going to work from home forever. Far from it.
Hmm.
What it does mean is that when people gather, it has to be purposeful. Purposeful presence over passive attendance. And I've heard many people say that on-site, coming to an office, is the new off-site. And if done correctly, it's curated by a leader. There's an agenda. There's probably, hopefully, a guest speaker. One would hope there's great food, maybe, and there's great socializing afterwards, and you're able to come together and collaborate. But just simply issuing mandates for people to come into an office just because is causing a revolt, and people aren't buying it. They're voting with their feet. In the keyboard economy, in this new collar economy, it's really challenging for middle managers who don't have the skills to lead. They previously were able to simply manage and evaluate individuals just by mere presence, butts and seats, right? If Joe is sitting at his assigned station, I'm here and therefore I'm being productive, which is likely a fallacy. And so I was productive, just to be clear. But there's a lot that has to go in. Oftentimes people talk about the traditional architecture industry, and you think about how much time and money goes into designing these buildings or designing the interiors of these spaces. And many people view the ribbon cutting as the end. By the way, the industry is at about $48 billion a year. And I argue that ribbon cutting is far from the end. In fact, that's the beginning of the process. And there needs to be a discipline away from traditional architecture to include choice architecture, where leaders can help nudge individuals to come and work wherever they need to work. And this is a concept out of behavioral economics, and there's only been 4 Nobel Prizes awarded in this area. So Richard Thaler from the University of Chicago, along with Cass Sunstein, has written a book called Nudge, which is really, really interesting. Have you read that?
Yeah. Nudge, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so there needs to be this evolution of choice architecture in conjunction with traditional architecture. You can't just build an office space and then expect people to come there, right? If you live in Westchester County, outside of New York, and you're commuting into Midtown, that's anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half each way to the office. So that's 2 to 3 hours of your life eliminated, wasted. Maybe you read a book, maybe you're on calls, but by and large, you're not seeing your kids or your loved ones. It's difficult.
It's not your choice. Like, this time is just gone. Like, okay, book or maybe a podcast, something, but the time is taken out of your choice. Like, and for the week, that's like 10 to 15 hours, which for the year ends up to be weeks of your life.
It's staggering, isn't it? And so one of the benefits of the pandemic for employees, which I call the new consumers, the working consumers, are that the tables are turned from everyone talking about work-life balance to now this life-work balance, right? And so I view that as a positive thing. Assuming, there's going to be bad apples, there's going to be people that abuse the privilege, but at the end of the day, if you're in a business where someone has to code, someone has to create a campaign, someone has to sell a commercial real estate building, do you really care how, where they work or how they work? Did you have to look over them? There's this notion of, for many companies issuing mandates, that you're almost hiring adults and then treating them like children, and you're expecting that it's going to go well. So,
but I want to double click on this, because I feel like there's a different spectrum of people working. Like, there are some who are very diligent on their own time, and they will be more diligent if you give them the freedom to work remotely. And for them, kind of retaining the freedom of being 100% remotely is worth doubling down during those actual work hours that they put in to retain the freedom. But then there's another group who will be like, I'm fully remotely, but I'm also like taking a vacation while I'm supposed to be working, you know. So there's a lot of things that have happened that made the bosses feel like, okay, like that this looks more like extended
Yeah.
vacations, and there's the work hasn't been done on the entire spectrum. I think there are some people that have the discipline and understand the freedom that they got and the benefits, and they really double down on it. And then there's others um, where it's very much gray, and like, where does my workday begin and where does it end, and have I actually delivered the value that would justify my position?
I agree. In this new collar slash keyboard economy, how do you measure results? The old method was around KPIs, right? What's your key performance indicator? And you go and you try to figure out each of the component steps leading to hopefully a desired outcome. And Google introduced the notion of OKRs, outcomes and key results. And when you think about the end in mind, and you think about those individuals, it's up to a leader who is leading a team to decide what the initiatives need to be for that team, and then to really look at the composition of the team and say who needs what. Younger people coming out of college have just gone through a meat grinder of a pandemic, right? They've probably lost multiple years of their lives because of the
Mhm.
pandemic. My daughter was in university during the pandemic, and tumultuous years, a very different experience than most of us experienced from college. And so how do you have to treat those individuals differently. And young people, you're right. If you think about the 20 to 30 somethings who generally are not married, or maybe they don't have children, those folks are going to probably want to be in a space. They're going to want to collaborate. They're going to want to counter the what's demonstrated as the epidemic of loneliness because of social media and everyone's scrolling. And I don't know how many times I walk through an airport and just see people staring down at their phones and not looking up. They're walking into things. We have to we have to re-engage as humans, and so there has to be a series of places for those folks to likewise be. 30s to 40s, tends to be in the child raising years, maybe even into the early 40s to 50s. Then you have the 50s to 60-year olds who need to be in the office periodically to mentor those young people. So
Yeah.
there's not a silver bullet in this discussion. Many try to get reductive to get to that silver bullet. It doesn't exist. It has to work for the team, and leadership is more important today than management. Managers can oversee production lines. Leaders need to oversee teams of people, and whether you come to the main HQ, the hub, or whether you go to a satellite office, or whether you go to a WeWork, or whether you gather somewhere else. I mean, there's new concepts where residential homes are being used as workspaces during the day, right? And who's to say that's not an idea that's going to catch on?
You know, one of the things that I've seen, like, we're in the multifamily space, so we look at developments, and they are building out a lot of more useful co-working within those developments now, where people feel like, okay, there's some printing space, there's office space here, there are meeting rooms, so we can now use those multifamily developments as a potential hub to create that in-person time intentionally, or to just at least feel like we're walking out of our own
Right.
apartment to go to work, and have maybe that psychological difference where somebody like shifts at least out of their apartment to feel like, okay, there's a clear distinction between what work and play is.
I think that's right. I know Avalon is now led by a former retail guy, and the word there is that every new development needs to have some level of co-working in it. Um,
Yeah, I would
yeah, to
agree.
your point, and it does make sense. One of you mentioned this earlier, and is that was around boundaries. How do I know when to start and stop my day? How do I? And that's a very difficult challenge, because far too many people burned out during the pandemic, working from home. And they started way too early, they ended way too late, they got unproductive toward the end. And it's really helpful to have a leader help you structure, um, and bounce ideas. It's not easy, but I think, as in most things, there's probably a distributed curve of slackers are one end, and the burned out on the other. And how do you keep people happy and healthy and productive?
So kind of taking everything we just put out on a psychological basis, how do we as commercial real estate investors make sense of that, given that our time horizon is closer to 10 years when we make those bets? And like what does this actually mean? Like when I look at retail, for example, which is also what your book is about, I see some of the prime malls still coming up, being built, and there's a lot of foot traffic. But at the same time, I see a lot of those average malls being half empty, and they're really struggling to make sense. And to some degree, it's also what I've seen in office in New York City before I moved, is there was a lot of those prime office spaces, but they weren't quite suitable for conversions and it was very hard to do. It was very expensive. It didn't quite pencil. Like, how are we supposed to make sense of that as investors that are actually applying capital for those potential conversions?
It's a great question. What I would say is invest in healthy ecosystems. And healthy ecosystems are defined as live, work, and play. And it's very somewhat irresponsible to have a sweeping generalization of a major city and say, Chicago, don't invest in Chicago because of everything you hear. I would say that there is a distinct difference between the Loop in Chicago, the traditional central business district, CBD, and the Fulton Market area that is located 2 miles to the west, which I call a better business district, a really healthy ecosystem happening there. And the difference is the amount of residential and restaurant and work and corporations that have decided to locate there. Including Google and McDonald's and a handful of others, WPP. So when you look at a healthy ecosystem, you know that there are daily needs generators. So are the grocery stores intact? Is there multifamily residential? Is there single family homes? And then, are there places where people can work as well? We also saw, and you really have to track daytime population. And for a retailer, daytime population is everything. During the pandemic, with so many people working from home, the suburbs just exploded from a daytime population perspective. And people were, all of a sudden instead of going to your dry cleaner at 7 in the morning or 6 at night, people were now going to the grocery anchored center, to the dry cleaner, to any of a number of businesses during the day. Now, conversely, those people were absent in a lot of the downtown areas, which became very, very problematic for not only national brands like you've heard of Walgreens closing stores, Target's closed stores for various reasons. So I'd really look at the better business districts in an urban area, the healthy ecosystems in the suburban areas. Those are going to be key investing criteria from my perspective.
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. Like if I think about what Manhattan looked like in the midst of the pandemic, it was like literally half of the daytime traffic that would usually move into the city. All those people that you mentioned coming in from Westchester, New Jersey earlier, those trains stayed empty. So the entire the entire scope of the business changed during that time.
It's funny. One of my colleagues during that time lived in Westchester, and every day he would give me the train barometer. He'd say it was either empty, or all the way up to I had to stand today, and it corresponded with the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the Mondays and Fridays. Fridays are definitely work alternatively in a hybrid sense. Mondays likewise, and we're seeing kind of natural patterns happening around Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So multifamily in downtowns, I would say you have to be careful. It's going to be difficult to retrofit a lot of these functionally obsolete B and C class office buildings. But there's some good news too, and I would say places like Detroit, which used to be abysmal, places like Tampa, downtown Tampa, which really didn't have necessarily a downtown. We're seeing this dramatic effect from big investors coming in, creating these healthy ecosystems around live, work, and play. Dan Gilbert of Rocket Mortgage and Quicken in Detroit has done a phenomenal job with his Bedrock development. Jeff Vinnick started what's called Water Street in Tampa. It's now funded by Cascade Development, which is Bill Gates.
I mean, downtown Tampa, the way we know it now, right of the pier there, and you have the aquarium. It's really like if you live there, you have it all. You have the workspaces, you have the restaurants right down. It's in all walking distance. You have entertainment in walking distance. If you can make this your home, it's as you said, you have the ecosystem. It's very healthy. You have everything you need, from gyms, restaurants, entertainment, to workspaces and premium living.
Exactly. Yeah, and those are things that you need to look at. In the last 2 weeks, I was in LA, I was in Chicago and San Francisco. And what I would say is there are some really, really bad pockets, but there's other parts of those cities that seem to be thriving. And the common denominator tends to be the live and play with a little bit of the work that's factored in. And when it's really humming, it's the live, work, play.
Yeah, which to me also translates a little bit. So we're looking for healthy ecosystems. If I think about those traditional suburban strip malls, I think that sounds like they're dead. There's a couple more premium hubs that make sense. And in terms of office, it only makes sense if it's part of those ecosystems. And I'm thinking as an investor now, like, where would we deploy the capital of our LPs and ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I would be, the office asset class is really tough right now to get financing. Unless you're building a One Vanderbilt in New York City, like SL Green built, or you're JP Morgan Chase and you're building 270 Park Avenue, which interesting note. And I have friends there responsible for building that building and bringing it to life. JP Morgan decided to use Norman Foster and Associates out of London, which happens to be the same architect that largely does all of the Nike work. And when you think about some of the iconic Nike locations, whether it's the Cube in front of the GM building, or any of the just beautiful stores that you see in throughout the country, a lot of those humanistic attributes are being brought to the JP Morgan building. In fact, the first 2 stories will be almost clear through almost an urban park of that entire block, and JP Morgan will be able to have 14,000 employees working in that building, different from their old building, which was a perfectly, it was fine for its time. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, great architect, that had about 3,000 or 4,000 people. So, creating that sense of place will be important. So as you're thinking about deploying capital, is there a sense of place? Is there a point of differentiation? Are employees, the new consumers, going to vote with their feet? Does the building, are the operators recognizing that the ribbon cutting is the beginning, not the end? And I bring that up because
Mhm.
my previous role, we built out a headquarters office for a global biopharma company in Philadelphia. It's 50,000 square feet. And we put in sensors called XY Sense throughout the two floors that encompass the 50,000 square feet. And we had somewhere around 16 different vignettes of workspaces. And we measured on a weekly basis dwell times in those different vignettes. Some were soft seating, some were traditional cubes, some were, some funky things with beanbag chairs and whatnot. And we measured where people were voting with their feet. And after about 3 months, we wound up taking 3 of those out because no one went there. So
Nobody
I,
liked the beanbags.
I can neither confirm nor deny that the beanbag was the culprit. But yeah, but it becomes this more kinetic experience around real estate. So you're thinking about it. How do you think about investing? Live, work, play. Do you have if you were going to invest in office and you had tenants coming in, do you have very forward thinking tenants, or is it sort of a set it and forget it? It's going to be difficult just to keep paying for empty office space. Shareholders and activist
Mhm.
investors are going to start asking questions.
Which also leads to the question: how much of bad mortgages is in that space?
Yeah,
I mean, the leases are coming to
yeah.
maturity.
I call this
There's
period the slow-moving car crash. We're watching it happen. By the end of 2026, we will see at least 50% of office leases in the US expire, and we'll see at least $2
Mhm.
trillion of mortgages backed by commercial real estate mature. So there's a reckoning that needs to happen. Will those office tenants renew in place? Will they downsize? Will they relocate? Will they consolidate? So that's going to be a big question. And then, part and parcel to that is what's going to happen with the debt. We're already seeing some of the largest and most high profile owners and operators of commercial real estate handing keys back. Shorenstein has somewhere close to $800 million of debt that are in buildings that are approaching functional obsolescence. They may have a high lease rate, but the occupancy, the daily occupancy tends to be very low. So I don't have the answer to that, but it's real, and we need to be watching it.
this makes me wonder how many retirement like investments are parked in these products.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect the debt. I don't have the answer to that, but it's a really good question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's one of those, where the time we live in gets so unpredictable, and everything has shifted. Like, we went from back in the days where your profession was literally your name. It's like what you would do and what your children would do, and now we're in a time where it's so unpredictable that you don't even know what you should be teaching in middle school right now, because whatever we've been teaching last 40 years is completely obsolete, and what the kids might be doing 10 years from now, 20 years from now, might be completely different. And in the same way, like, where do you deploy capital in investments where office spaces are in complete transformation and shifting? And as you said, it's very hard to make
Yeah,
sense
I
of it.
mean, my friend Tom Statt, who used to run the Chicago office of IDEO, the design thinking firm, introduced this concept of VUCA to me. Have you heard of that acronym VUCA? It
No.
actually came out of the Army War College post Vietnam, where for the first time the U.S. actually engaged in this asymmetrical warfare. Right? We didn't know who the enemy was necessarily because they weren't wearing a uniform per se, the guerrilla warfare. And so what was dubbed is this notion of VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And in many respects, we're living in a VUCA world where we have volatility
Yeah.
and uncertainty. Things are complex and they're certainly ambiguous. Where key companies and key leaders, key investors come in, they're able to flip VUCA and go from volatility to vision. What is our vision? Uncertainty to understanding, complexity to clarity, and my favorite is ambiguity to agility. So if you're able to flip VUCA, and I talk about that in the book a bit, you're at an advantage, a competitive advantage. Personally, I'm investing in daily needs, grocery anchored retail, whether they're grocery anchored centers or they're what we call daily needs, food and beverage, retail concepts on out parcels and things of the like. I think that's a strong place to be right now, given that for the longest period of time, there's been a lack of new construction. In fact, because of the old irrelevant retail space, there's been close to 100 million square feet taken offline. So not only we're not building it, we're actually taking more inventory away. So there's a supply and a demand imbalance. The demand is far outstripping the supply. If you're a retailer, if you're Kava, for instance, which is one of the newest, hottest, brands emerging, they need to grow. They report somewhere around 50 stores a year. Where are those going to come from? Well, you need a developer to go and build those typically. Doing conversions is possible, but more and more we're seeing, particularly as we're both in Florida, the number of housing starts happening in places like Daytona. I'm in northern Florida, so Jacksonville, Daytona, even Orlando continues to expand. It's mind-boggling. So those people will need the daily needs as well. Thinking in terms of hub and spoke from an office perspective, the core business districts hopefully will have a place, and they'll need to have that, Tampa feel, the live, work, play. But in suburban areas, having relevant space available for people to meet and gather, and we're seeing more and more of the flexible office operators finding success in the suburbs. So again, instead of leaving your multifamily facility and going down to the co-working space, you leave your single family home and go to a Serendipity Labs or an Industrious or any of the IWG or any of the other flexible office operators.
Which probably also leads to that, like, tier 2 or 3 cities become more attractive because you can create those hubs, and the connectivity allows you to make a decent income somewhere where you don't need to be in New York City or live as close as Westchester. Or
the tier 2 and 3 cities are generally vehicular cities as well. So the notion of suburban mass transit has certain positives, but we're also seing that the individual, the consumer, whether they're spending their money in a retail store or making their money at a particular office, a business, they want to have that flexibility to move around, and it doesn't have to be 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. So I agree. I mean, we know we've seen these, this resurgence in lifestyle cities like the Salt Lake cities, the Boise. I'm told to pronounce it correctly. Boise, Idaho, Bozeman, Montana, and so forth. Yeah, just great places.
I think Bozeman has a big pop culture moment right now with Yellowstone. So there's a lot of people who became aware of the beauty of Montana and Bozeman.
Spectacular. Yeah, for sure.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time. And for everybody listening, go to joebrady.ai. And where else can they grab your book?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, at joebrady.ai. I've got links to all of those locations. And, here's a copy of it. A little bit of work, a little bit of shop. And feel free to check it out. I appreciate it. And it's great spending time with you today. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you for joining us at The Path to Wealth. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Check out our upcoming guests and be sure to share it with all your friends and family that want to take their life to the next level of wealth.